Shabbat Shalom. Today's Torah portion is Pinchas, Phineas, and it begins actually with the very end of the story of the children of Israel having been tempted by the Midianites to worship Baal Peor, and Pinchas, it begins actually with Pinchas's being praised by God for the action he takes in stabbing and killing the couple who are with their audacity challenging God and challenging Moses. When God rewards Phineas, he gives him something that is very interesting. The way it's said here, we're talking about chapter 25, verse 12. Wherefore say, behold, I give unto him my covenant of peace, and he shall have it, and his seed after him, even the covenant of a priesthood forever, because he was zealous for his God and made an expiation for the children of Israel. So first of all, it's very ironic that a person who has just stabbed two people is given a covenant of peace. And not only given a covenant of peace, but at the same time that he's given that covenant for peace, he is rewarded and told that he's getting this because he did the right thing, because in being zealous for God's honor and in killing these people, he did the right thing. Perhaps in the covenant of peace is some kind of a shield, some kind of a protection for Phineas and for those who come after him. The idea being that, yes, you do have to take these strong actions sometimes, but perhaps you need a covenant of peace to protect you from abusing these sort of actions and having them turn into habit, knowing when is the right time to be zealous and when is not. But I would like to focus on the next type of covenant, because here God says, even the covenant of a priesthood forever. Now, we know already that Aaron has been given the priesthood, set aside from the other members of the tribe of Levi. He and his children will be priests. We know that already. So what exactly has been added to Phineas? Phineas, after all, is a grandson of Aaron. He is the son of Eleazar. What then has Phineas been given that he didn't have before? And there are a number of commentaries about this. Of course, one of the commentaries say that what really is being given right now to Phineas is the high priesthood. We know that the descendants of Aaron will become the priests, but it is only one in any given generation who will actually be the high priest. Now, we know Aaron has already died at this point, and his mantle has been given to Eleazar. Aaron had two surviving sons, but it was Eleazar who was chosen to be the actual heir of Aaron in that senior priest or high priesthood. And in this case, perhaps what's happening now is that the next generation has already been selected. It is Phineas who will become the next heir of the high priesthood once Eleazar it passes away. However, we see something else that's going on here. On the one hand, we have a priesthood that is being handed from father to son, so that it really is not a question of the actions of a particular individual. If his father is the priest, he will become the priest. And indeed, Phineas, even in being given the high priesthood, it is given to him as an eternal covenant, which means also Phineas will be passing on something to his sons, and they then on afterwards. But again, the question is, does it matter what his sons are like? And yet at the same time, it is Phineas who is given this actual covenant as a result of behavior on his part. Not just because he happens to be Eleazar's son, but that God is making special mention of the fact that he has done something very special. So it's a very interesting combination of something that is inherited and something that is given as a result of a prize or a reward for proper actions. We can contrast this with a different sort of inheritance that takes place later on in the weekly portion. And this, of course, is the handing over or the appointment of Joshua to eventually inherit Moses. This happens in chapter 27, and Moses is quite concerned. God speaks to him, verse 12, and tells him he should go up onto this mountain where he will then see the land, and reminds him that he will be passing away, that he will be dying before entering the land of Israel, and the children of Israel will enter without him. At which point, in verse 15, Moses speaks to God and says as follows, "Let the Lord, the God of the spirits of all flesh, set a man over the congregation, who may go out before them and who may come in before them, who may lead them out and who may bring them in, that the congregation of God should be not as a flock which has no shepherd. So Moses is very concerned that there be an heir to his leadership, because he's concerned that the children of Israel will be lost if they do not have a leader. And he specifically says, someone who will go out before them and who may come in before them. Somebody who is actually going to come before them, to lead them out, bring them in. The assumption here is taking them out to battle, bringing them in from battle, and other sorts of decisions that the leader has to make in deciding how the children of Israel should behave as a nation. God responds and tells him that he should appoint Joshua. But then he says in verse 21, and he shall stand before Eleazar the priest, who shall ask counsel for him after the judgment of the breastplate before God. At his word shall they go out, and at his word they shall come in. We have here then that God appoints an heir, Joshua, and wants Moses to give part of his glory to Joshua, clearly passing on the mantle, so to speak. But on the other hand, whereas Moses has asked that that same person be the one who leads the people and brings them in and takes them out, decides when to go to war, God says something else. God says, yes, okay, here's your heir, it's going to be Joshua. But he is not going to be able to make the decisions as to when to go to war, how to lead the people in these kind of situations. He has to come to the high priest, who will then consult through the breastplate, will then consult with God, and then based upon what the high priest says, then this will happen. Basically then what we have in this portion is the setting up of how the leadership will be in the nation of Israel following the generation of Moses and Aaron. We have Eleazar as being the next high priest, but we already know that it will be Phineas who will be the high priest after him. And their roles are very defined. The role of the high priest is not just about sacrifice in the temple. That we know about from before when we learned about the very priesthood that has been given to the sons of Aaron. Here we're talking about a very specific role of the high priest, a role that will be shared by both Eleazar and later by Phineas. And the role is to determine when they go to war based upon the instructions they receive from God through the breastplate. The balance of power here, then, is very, very clear. No one person is going to be able to make decisions on things as monumental as going to war. Joshua can make, can suggest it, can think this is a good thing, but he must approach the high priest. And this is true of any leader after Joshua as well. The king has to approach the high priest, or the leader, the political leader, has to approach the high priest, and in combination, they are the ones who will give the directive as to whether to go to war. So it is particularly interesting that the high priest is given that role, and it's a role that's particularly appropriate for someone like Phineas, who is not afraid to brandish his sword when need be. But at the same point, God has given him that covenant of peace, so he has a covenant with God. He is not brandishing his sword whenever he feels like it. He brandishes his sword as part of a covenant with God. And at the same time, the political leader, Joshua, has limited powers. He is definitely the leader. He is Moses' heir, but at the same time, his powers are limited. Now, Joshua, however, is appointed, and he is not given anything eternal. He is not going to pass anything on to his children, and indeed Moses himself does not pass anything to his children. The role of the political leader has nothing to do with biological inheritance. This is not somebody's son. A person is designated. The priesthood, on the other hand, is about being somebody's son, but even then it is connected, number one, to responsibility to God, and number two, it's very much connected to the fact that Phineas, who was given this role, was rewarded it as a result of an action he did. One more thing I just want to point out. There is one high priest that is moved from his role because he or particularly his children are removed from that inheritance because they are not worthy. And that, of course, is Eli, the last high priest in the tabernacle of Shiloh, which we know from the book of Samuel. His children are shifted, and that whole family after Eli is no longer part of the priesthood, and it shifts to another part of the family. Shabbat Shalom from Samaria.